to China through Taiwan. Now, Carl, you're into the history as well as the current events, and people see China now, and the Western media depicts them as aggressive, just as you said. But in reality, didn't the U.S. actually militarily occupy Taiwan for years, and then only when they agreed to the One China policy, they officially left. But unofficially, they have been backing separatism there ever since. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it has led to this point where we're at now and how that guides Chinese policy today?
Yeah, so what most people don't realize is United States have been intervening in a Chinese civil war since 1949. In 1949 is when the Chiang Kai-shek government on mainland China has been defeated by the communists, and they fled to the island of Taiwan. And in 1950, Mao was about to order the PLA to cross the Taiwan Strait to finally unify Taiwan with mainland. Then in June 1950, the Korean War broke out. And then Truman authorized the 7th Fleet to sail into the Taiwan Strait to physically blocking the People's Liberation Army from crossing the Taiwan Strait. And back then, because mainland China didn't have a navy, they didn't have an air force, there's not much they could do. Now, keep in mind, in June 1950, this is before the Chinese involvement in the Korean War itself. So eventually, all the Chinese troops was on the other side of the Taiwan Strait that was ready to go to Taiwan. They were shipped north by the winter, by October, and when United States and so-called UN forces have crossed the 38th parallel despite the Chinese warning into North Korea, and that's those troops that would have gone to Taiwan went into Korean War. So this is what got us to the situation today. The separation between Taiwan and mainland China happened because in 1950, Truman sent in the 7th Fleet. And Angelo was earlier talking about stationing U.S. Marines and nuclear weapons on Taiwan. That happened. That all happened before. So back in 1950s, U.S. stationed up to 30,000 troops, military personnel on the island of Taiwan, and they stationed ballistic missiles with nuclear warhead aiming at mainland China. And a couple of years ago, before Daniel Ellsberg, before he died, he revealed that back in 1958, U.S. had a plan to use nuclear weapons on China if Mao had authorized the PLA to take, not even take Taiwan, but take a little offshore island, a couple kilometers off the Chinese coast, the island of Kinmen. And if the PLA had crossed, back then the Pentagon plan was to strike China with nuclear weapons they had positioned on Taiwan itself. So that all changed with the Nixon visit to China in 1972. After Nixon and the then Premier Zhou Enlai, they signed the Shanghai Communique, in which the Shanghai Communique actually says that United States should recognize that the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are part of one China, and Taiwan is part of China. And United States recognize that this is an issue to be resolved among the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. And U.S. do not stake a position. This forms the basis of the Sino-American relationship, the normalization of ties that happened afterwards, leading on to the establishment of full diplomatic relationship in 1979. What have happened since was that the two countries have getting increasingly intertwined economically through people-to-people exchange, but around 2012, around during the time when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, that's when United States suddenly realized that during the years that it has spent on military adventurism in Afghanistan, in Iraq, China have now grown its own domestic economy to the point now it poses as a near peer competitor to United States, which United States find unacceptable because they don't want any challenge to their hegemony in any part of the world. And that's when they initiated so-called pivot to Asia. So what they have done is they're starting to gradually walk away from their own commitment to the One China policy, that which had been the linchpin of the China-U.S. relationship. That's why we've seen Nancy Pelosi flew into Taiwan on the U.S. Air Force asset with the U.S. Air Force fighter escorts, right? And this is just United States know where Chinese red line is. Right? Chinese red line has been very clear. As long as Taiwan do not declare formal independence, status quo can go on as it is currently. The overwhelming majority people on Taiwan has said they want to maintain the status quo, right? But what United States is doing is exactly what they have done in Eastern Europe when they expanded the NATO eastward to a Russian border since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So since Soviet Union, U.S. is stepping closer and closer to the red line. It's like, oh look, I'm almost touching it, and it's a really stupid game because this is highly dangerous. United States and China are both nuclear armed nations. Anytime, just one mistake, we could face a World War III situation. Like currently, there's about at least 3 U.S. carrier groups acting around Chinese coast, right? I mean, and they're in close proximity with the Chinese Navy. Any mistake, unplanned mistake, it could blow up to World War III with unforeseen consequences. This is highly irresponsible. But again, I'm ranting again, so I yield my time to Brian and Angelo.
No, that's okay. That's why we got you on here. I think it's really important for people to understand that China remembers all of this. The American public know none of this because the Western media deliberately omits this out of every single article. They always imply or infer that Taiwan is somehow a country. And I know Americans who are smart and relatively well-informed who honestly think Taiwan is a country. They have no idea that even the Constitution of the administration in Taiwan, which is actually called the Republic of China, considers Taiwan to be part of one single China.
Brian,
yeah.
Many Americans can't tell the difference between Thailand and Taiwan.
That's true. I've had people, hey, Brian, how are things in Taiwan? I couldn't tell you. So China remembers the U.S. putting tens of thousands of troops on that island, and they remember them pointing missiles at the rest of China from that island. They remember that. So the fear is real and it is rational, and the Western media pretends that it's irrational. China is aggressive, and the U.S. is just stepping in to be peacemaker when they're at the core of the problem in the first place. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that after the Civil War, it was the U.S. intervention that kept the Republic of China alive. From then all the way until now, military and political support from Washington is what has sustained the Republic of China in Taipei. There's a myth that it is autonomous or self-governing. It would not exist without constant U.S. support. So that is really important to keep in mind. And then there was the Kuomintang, and now we have the Democratic Progressive Party. These are the two main parties that are vying for power in the administration of Taiwan. There's going to be an election next year, isn't it? January 2024. I'd like Angelo and then Carl, how is this going to impact this? And is this going to force the U.S. to rush its timeline for trying to provoke some sort of conflict with China over Taiwan? Because before Tsai Ing-wen and the Democratic Progressive Party got into power, as Carl was saying, the ties between Taiwan and the rest of China were actually improving and going quite well. And then the U.S. interrupted, just like they did in Ukraine, the Sunflower Movement, and essentially they got Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP into power. So